things going on in the African world. Do we agree or not?
Yeah.
Who knows what is happening in Tanzania, South Africa? Does anybody not know what is happening in South Africa today? Anybody who doesn't know what is happening? If you don't know, please raise up your hand. Okay, what is happening? Abarigani. South Africa is going through crisis that they had experienced before, I think 2008 or 2009. They went through the same problem. That is, the Africans in South Africa think other Africans are aliens who are coming to South Africa to take their jobs, and so they are looting businesses of other Africans who live in South Africa, and they are not stopping there. They are actually also killing fellow Africans because they are taking their job. Now, whites in South Africa, I think whites went to South Africa in the 1600s and 1700s and took all the land, put us in concentration camps, and most Africans didn't have the guts to stand up and fight the invaders into their land. But they are venting their anger on fellow Africans who have actually their fellow brothers and sisters in South Africa to fight and liberate, I won't say liberate here, but to fight, the system of oppression. And so out of ignorance, a lot of times we do things that is not good for the collective interest of all Africans. And so we have to, we have to know what is going on around us. Of course, there are, the situation in South Africa is not, it's major, but that is not the only thing that is going on. We remember that in 2010, President Obama also invaded Libya and took out Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi, of course, only sin was advocating for African true sovereignty in terms of Africans having a leverage in the world whereby we can sit on the round table with the rest of the world on equal footing. And they didn't like it because he is promoting African unity and actually financing African unity. So Obama went and took him out. And since then, Africa has been in a state of confusion. Africans are turning onto the oppressors, the same invaders and exploiters, to finance our so-called union. And it's not working because somebody is dictating because they're giving the money. There's a lot of work to be done by all of us. And I quote one of our elders who made this transition about 2 years ago, about Ndugu Tufuriata, who actually is a native of Atlanta, who said, until Africa is free and liberated, or when Africa rises, all of us rise along with her, and when Africa falls, we all fall with her. And Africa is falling, and so there is no security for any African. There is no security for any black man. And unless we build Africa, the black world, into what we all aspire it to be, I think we've got to train others, and others are going to take us for granted. And so that we live here tonight energized, properly educated, so that we can impact our own immediate family first, and then we can also impact our neighborhood and the communities that we live in, because it's very critical that we have to do something about our pollution, because we can't keep going on. Invite and thank the great spirits. First of all, we thank the planet Earth that our ancestors gave us, the mighty oceans, the great water, the air, the wind, fire, and everything that helps to sustain our lives and our being. We want to offer them thanks by saying Ashe.
I'm taking a small seal who needs no introduction to the crowd gathered because the name alone is working. So without further ado, I will have Baba Smalls lead us in this lecture of African family.
Ashe.
a PowerPoint, but that may take too much time. This situation in South Africa, I learned about last night because I was running on the road for a minute. But don't seem so shocked. We do that in Chicago every weekend. We do it in Atlanta every weekend. We do it in Cleveland every weekend. Black folks kill black folks. Self-hate leads to self-destruction. You know, Wade Noble says the problem is that we're suffering from a fractured consciousness and a shattered black identity. So we don't know who we are. Even those of us in here who say we are the conscious ones, we don't know who we are either. Because we try to create identities when we don't have to. If you look, and we have our big sister and mother here, One Africa, you should stand up. People need to know
a goal
this
is building trust, but from our own selves, making a decision to be trustworthy, to make a conscious pledge to yourself, because Baba Small talked about we are our own gods, so to ourselves, to be trustworthy.
She has this most fantastic museum, because most people don't think of the museum when they think of One Africa. And work in the community, help to organize the local people in the area. Her husband was the chief of the village that they moved into, called Itru, by a beautiful body of water called the Sweet River. But don't let that fool you. That Sweet River was where we shed a lot of blood fighting the crackers when he was trying to put us in slavery. We've got to understand that African culture is the culture of godness. Don't confuse that with Jesusness. Not that Jesus is a bad idea. If we were actually doing what Jesus was about, we'd be the most fantastic people in the world and the most powerful. But we don't even understand what the Jesus myth is, because that too is an African myth painted white. So it comes down to, do you know your history? And the problem is, we don't. Even the best of us, here comes Brother Mikasa, walking in the house.
All y'all saying that we are in a desperate situation. When you look at all over the world, not just our children being lynched and murdered in the streets, but this happening in Colombia, Brazil, all throughout South America, Africa, we under attack.
Black power. Black power. We're talking about the black family. But the family isn't the European myth of a family. You know, we just did a ceremony for Dr. Ben in New York, and I did what they call the opening of the mouth ceremony, and tried to show, but that's myth. Opening the mouth of a physically dead person is not bringing him alive physically, okay? There's a point to be made to that. You're talking about opening up the consciousness that the person left behind with the body of knowledge that they left for us to use. That's how a person continues to speak to you. It gets deeper than that. Your grandmother or grandfather or great-parents who are gone, how do they speak to you? How do you open their mouths? You open their mouths by opening your consciousness. Because each one of us is a depositing of every one of your ancestors that went before you. Everything that your ancestors ever did, every experience they ever had, every stimulation to their nervous system, when that egg and that sperm met, it deposited it all into the new body. And each one of us is the sum total of millions and millions of years of experiences. But without a knowledge of those ancestors, you can't access the experience that lives in your own nervous system. What African culture and spirituality is about is creating rituals, music, and rhythms that put you in touch with those rhythms that are in your spiritual system. I had a heart attack about 5 years ago. Yeah, brothers like me get heart attacks too. I'll be out here doing the crazy things that people like me do. Running, not eating, not sleeping, and not resting, etc. And I had something called ventricular tachycardia. I never heard of that. It means you're so stressed, your heart starts beating so fast, it won't stop. And it just runs out of steam and you just out. I was lucky it happened to me in the cardiologist's office. Otherwise, y'all would be talking about the memory of Brother Small. But what happened when they got me to the hospital and they ran me through every test in the world, couldn't find anything. This was Frank, and they threw the dust off my feet, you know what I'm saying? And knocked me down all the way in America. That's why I had to go do what I had to do. Some of them went home. But cleaning up that nest wasn't easy. So when they couldn't find anything, they brought two young white guys to me and said, Mr. Small, we can't find anything wrong with you. I went in every imaging machine they had. EKG, MRI, everything. Then they said, we are going to bring in a team of electricians. So I thought the guy's making a big joke and they're going to let me go home. No, they brought in electricians. I said, electricians? This is yes. You know, your brain is an electrical generating plant. All right? And it produces electrical signal and is sending it to all the other organs and cells in your body. And so we want to see if there's something interfering with the electrical system from your brain and the parts of the heart that it should be, you know, send the signals to. And they worked on me for 3 days, testing and testing. Then they came on one and said, Mr. Small, yeah, good news and bad news. I said, okay, give me the bad news first. I may as well know what's up. They said, well, we can't find anything wrong with you. So I said, what is the good news? We can't find anything wrong with you. So I said, give me my pants, give me my shoes, I'm going home. But what I learned is what we always knew. When you're talking about Africans, you're not talking about European cultural beings. We didn't do all those things we did in history, acting like murderers and thieves and robbers and rapers. The only thing you know about European is that they murder people. They steal from people. They rape people. Right. They lie to people. Right. They misrepresent people. And they will oppress anybody they have to get some things, like a bottle of wine, or to have sex with whom they want to, or to have land where they want to. They will commit any crime against nature and humanity to do it. That's the history we know about. And yet we over here pretending that's not the history. You're not going to understand South Africa unless you understand the nature of the oppression. We call it apartheid, like it's some work program the people were in. Mm-hmm. This was the worst genocide in the history of mankind. And it didn't end. When Nelson Mandela came out of prison in ANC, and no disrespect to those who love ANC, but ANC isn't doing nothing but managing apartheid.
That's right.
Exactly.
And that was the intent. Not a bit of the wealth changed hands from those who were committing the crimes to those whom the crimes were committed against when the so-called independence came. The crackers kept all the mines, all the gold, all the platinum, all the diamonds. They didn't exchange anything, and they signed such agreement that they won't.
Right.
So then they got a bunch of black dudes that made a few of them so-called middle class. They're well-paid policemen to now manage apartheid on the black people of South Africa. That don't excuse the behavior of any brother or sister that take the lives of any other brother or sister, but you need to understand why a human mind is behaving in the way they're behaving. We live in this Atlanta, and I was driving around like New York. I'm looking for the black-owned restaurant. I want to meet some nice black food. We found a couple. We had to do a whole, how come a whole black world can't feed itself? We can't cook no more. What's wrong with that? And then we went to a spot where the sister had a beautiful vegetarian restaurant. I ate there the last time when I was here with Griff. And then there's some hot wings thing across the plaza and a Chinese thing, and that's where we all hanging out. While the sister's barely getting business. What's wrong with that consciousness that allowed that to happen? That consciousness don't know who they are. They're slaves. And that's right. And the way one makes you a slave, they take away your identity. You have to have an identity to be free. You have to know what you're fighting for. You have to be able to assign value and worth upon yourself. in order to defend the integrity of the value and the worth you assign to yourself. But you can't do that unless you know your history. History isn't just some dates in a book. History tells you who your enemies are and who your friends are. History tells you how to respond to the conditions you find yourself in and what is the cause of those conditions. History gives you points where you can find places that will allow you to come up with solutions. And so we're in this situation. We have a president who's black, but black is not a color of the skin because we're all brown. So when we say black, we're talking about the essential essence of African culture and humanity at the very beginning of our beginning. Our perfection. Black is talking about a way of knowing reality, not about how you look. How you look is incidental to that. But if you don't know how to think, it doesn't matter how you look. That's why we can hurt each other in such gross ways over nothing. Because being black is a way of seeing reality. Somebody asks you, what is God? Everybody have a definition of God. Everybody. Everybody have a religion. Religion is nothing more than the way someone tries to acknowledge the divinity in themselves. We call it worship. But if you don't have a divinity that makes sense to you, then you worship a divinity that has nothing to do with your reality. What does a dead white man on a cross, the symbol of a dead white man on a cross, because for the most part, these are some homosexual white models, drug-using models, whose picture, because there was no camera back in the day. So whose picture is that up in your house? No, just to be real. Don't get scared, but I know you're in Jesus' school. I understand that. I'm messing. See, Jesus is not that photograph. Jesus is ideas and principles that you can develop in your character, which are African ideas and principles that was here before the first white image. But if you don't know those African ideas and principles, how can you develop it in your character? And when we talk about family, family begins with the individual that's built of quality attributes and principles that make up their character. And that individual tries to mate with another individual of like character. And they create a family, that nuclear family, based on those principles and those attributes. We're talking about honesty. We're talking about responsibility. We're talking about compassion. We're talking about love. We're talking about respect. There's sets of qualities and attributes that nature exudes every day that our ancestors made normal in how we behave. And they create music and dance to constantly reinforce those principles in our characters every day. And they knew what they were. So when, like the brother was saying, Ashe, from the Yoruba language, which kind of means like what we mean when we say amen or so be it, but that isn't exactly what it means. It kind of means like recognize the power. There is a force, there's a power within nature and you that you must acknowledge. So if I was to take just some of the Orishas, if I take Oya, how many persons in this room? I know there must be an Oya devotee in the room. But Oya is one of the Orishas. He's supposed to be the Orisha of wind. And then I take Shango. Shango is supposed to be the Orisha of the lightning and the thunder. And then I take Ogun, the Orisha of iron. Now if we stop right there with that little child's game, you'll never know what the hell they are about. Oya, symbolized by the wind, and supposed to be the guardian of the gateway to the cemetery. What does that mean? Those are metaphoric expressions. Oya means change in process. Like the wind changed move things away and allow new things to come into being. Shango, the thunder, the lightning, it's the quickening. It's when you have a thought and suddenly realize, I need to change myself for better. And you're willing to drop your bad habits and learn some new ones to reconstruct yourself. So Shango is the courage to change. The courage to change for the better. And what does the courage to change do? Marry, change, and process. So in the metaphor, Shango becomes the husband of Oya. But now if you get caught up in the metaphor and don't understand the meaning, you're just having fun. So I'm Shango and I'm Oya and flipping hair locks all around. And that's not what it's about. And then Oya does something that a lot of women over here like to say, oh, she practicing polyandry. She got two men. Because she marries Ogun. Now Ogun is the god of iron. But how do you get iron or steel? You take a piece of rock out the ground and you knock the rest of the dirt off of it and you throw it in the fire and burn out the impurities, and then you take what's left and use to make tools and weaponry. What does that represent? Transformation as a result of change. So Shango is the courage to want to change for the better. Oya is change in process. And Ogun is transformation as a result of that change. So if you're going to study African tradition, then you've got to learn the language. Because it is the language that will let you explain the symbols to yourselves. You understand? You may not learn to speak it because we have a lot of African language. But at least get it proficient enough that you understand the basic symbols in the language. You understand what I'm saying? That story of this guy, Jesus with the 12 disciples, it's not a new story. You got Heru. You got Aset giving birth of immaculate conception to the child who we call Heru in ancient Kemet. You've got a black Madonna in the Temple of Miriam from the 6th century in Ethiopia. Michelangelo don't paint his white Madonna until the 15th century. So that's not a new concept in our culture. What is new is that we've lost the history that our ancestors assigned to those concepts, and we are now trying to mimic and make work for us what the white man assigned to African concepts. And it's not going to work. I don't care how pure your heart is. If you're driving off of a cliff, you're going off of a cliff, and you're going to die. You got to know there's a cliff there, and you hit the brake. Stop the car. Get out quietly. So when we're talking about family, the first thing you have to think about is what is the culture that is going to produce the consciousness in the individual that's going to make up that family. Then we got to ask, what is culture? People think culture is dancing, or culture is singing, or culture is drumming. None of those things are culture. Those are all tools of culture. Culture is your community's ideology. Culture is your community philosophy. What the tools do is find ways to help you remind yourself, enforce it in yourself, and teach it to yourself. So if you understand, what is your philosophy? Why did our people have a sun as our deity in ancient Kemet? What was that? They didn't think the sun was God. Black folks wasn't that stupid. They knew the sun symbolized something, that without it, all life ceased to be. Okay? And since you had this one symbol in your environment that says, without it, all life ceased to be, then you had to say to yourself, our ancestors said, let me tell you something. The only thing anybody know about God come from the mind of men and women.
That's right.
I don't care how far back you go. That's right. That's the only thing anybody know about God comes from the mind of men and women. It's just that there were deeper understandings then than we have now. Why? There was a story, somebody told a metaphor about some white folks come to Africa and they were building churches, chopping down these trees and building these churches, and the black folks were sitting on a stump and laughing at them. White folks said, look at them old crazy Negroes, they don't have any sense to get out here and help us work and build for God. Black folks listen to each other laugh and say, look how stupid that white man is thinking he can build a house big enough to hold God. Because if you take in almost every African language, the definition of God is every and all things at once. The totality of creation is divinity. We, the human being, in African culture is nothing more than an expression of an aspect of that divinity having this peculiar experience. But in that, we understand when we look at what we call our deities, that even though we are an expression of an aspect of the totality, we contain all the essence of that totality. But that has to be your everyday thought. That has to be how you organize your village. That has to be how you organize your thinking. That has to be how you organize your relationship between your wife or you and your husband. That's how you organize your relationship with your children. And then that's how you take your family, meet another family, and organize with that family to create a neighborhood, then take that neighborhood, meet another neighborhood, and organize that neighborhood to create a community, and that community find another community working by the same principles and organize it to create a nation. But within that context, you've got to understand that people, what do people want on a daily basis? Food. You're not going to live without food. Shelter. And in most cases, in most climates, you need clothing. And you need safety. So how can you guarantee that you will have food, you will have clothing, you will have safety, and you have security? You can only guarantee that if you control the what? The economic, the politics, and the culture in the environment you live in. Whether you live in a rural environment or an urban environment. If you can't control the economics, the politics, and the culture, you can't build a community. If you can't control the economics, the politics, and the culture, you can't build a community.
I don't care if your children are hungry or not. Hey, my kids, I don't like you, I don't know you.
I think that we as men, we have to really internalize African culture and tradition and move out all of that. I think that's one of the models that we have, is the inclusivity.
This is what we're going to do. We're going to implement it, let's get it done, then we'll get it done. But if we're just going to talk about it and not be about it, the conversation becomes vague. It's like, oh, okay, it's just in the air, we just sound good.
I'm pissed off. I'm pissed off because our children are dying and we're doing nothing. We're not handing out no punishment to these people for what they doing to our children.
Okay, I want to send my greetings to WACPtv in Atlanta, and I want you to know that if you rebuild the African family, you will rebuild the African civilization. If you think the murder of your children, the dropping out of school, the unemployment and the incarceration and the drugs is a problem, the best way to solve that problem is to turn your head backwards into your history and your culture and learn how to reconstruct and rebuild the African family. So WACPtv, I'm on it in Atlanta. That is the truth. The family is the foundation of civilization. Rebuild your family and you will learn how to protect yourself and provide the economic, politics, and culture you need to survive. Peace and love.
Thank you much for sharing.
Thank you.